I've tried to stay very, very close to the Lord, and I'm very thankful for that. But he's been firmly just confirming to me over and over and over again, and he's shown me where people have felt hurt or unseen, and there are people out there that are wounded or distanced from God, and it's through my leadership, and I am deeply sorry. I've asked you to forgive me, and I ask you once again. Repentance to me isn't just a word. I want to make sure that I bring into context the reality of the timeline in this, because this isn't a 20-year or 30-year thing. First of all, I've only been saved for 21 years, and we didn't move here until 2016. We moved to Dallas in faith. In 2018, we purchased a building, and we had school growth and all these students in order to nurture. And we tried the best with what we had, and the pace was really, really, really fast. In 2020, we launched a congregation during COVID on Yom Kippur, which when I look back, that absolutely happened way more quickly than grace allowed. And I moved with zeal ahead of grace. And unfortunately, when you do that, even though you have a goal in mind, there's people that get hurt along the way.
The apology was supposed to quiet the storm. Instead, it poured gasoline on a fire that had already been burning for months. When Todd White finally went online to address mounting allegations surrounding his ministry, many supporters expected clarity, humility, and perhaps a turning point. What they saw instead was a brief, carefully worded statement that, in the eyes of critics, skimmed the surface of deep and troubling accusations. Within hours, social media feeds, Christian YouTube channels, and ministry blogs were flooded with reactions. The central complaint was not that he apologized, but that he did not actually say what he was apologizing for. White, a once celebrated figure in charismatic Christian circles, had built his reputation on bold declarations of faith, public healings, and a supernatural lifestyle message that attracted thousands. He was known for street evangelism videos, claims of dramatic miracles, and statements about living free from sin for years. His ministry expanded rapidly, culminating in the acquisition of a sprawling campus intended to serve as a training center for believers. He became, to many, a symbol of modern charismatic revivalism. But as scrutiny increased, so did the questions. When the apology appeared, viewers hoped it would address specific allegations that had been circulating for months, claims of financial mismanagement, spiritual abuse, misleading statements, and questionable fundraising tactics. Instead, critics said the apology felt general. There were acknowledgments of mistakes and admissions of being imperfect, but no detailed accounting of what had gone wrong. No timeline. No explicit naming of actions. No clear restitution plan. To some, that omission was everything. Joshua Simone, a Christian commentator who had been vocal about concerns within charismatic leadership circles, described the apology as deeply inadequate.
Todd is basically saying, whoops, I made some mistakes and I'm sorry about that, but now let's talk about my ministry school.
We actually have historical student growth right now. We're almost at 400 students. Now that's in person and online. And the retention rate, which is the most important part, because that means a student's not just coming for a little bit of time. They're actually coming and signing up for second year. And second year, actually, this year is the biggest that we've had as far as the interest in internship in third year. Doctrine is really important. The standards of doctrine are very important. And we want to make sure that our students get a top of the line education. Last fall, we were able to get accreditation. We were able to get accredited to give people a degree in biblical studies. They can come here for a 2-year associate's degree.
This apology was a disgrace. And if you're going to apologize, you must do a much better job than this. Bethel's apology from 2 weeks ago was much more acceptable. This all points to an underlying issue that is much more serious. I don't think people in the charismatic church understand the whole theology of sin, brokenness, repentance, and forgiveness. We have this idea that you could make a huge mess and just turn to God and say sorry and quickly move on. And in real life, it doesn't work that way. You can sometimes do this for minor offenses, but for major offenses like what Todd White is being accused of, several different really serious allegations. Christians are called to forgive, but what Todd White did wasn't repentance. So it really stops the forgiveness process, because I think as Christians, we do want to forgive. We do want to give people a chance to move on with their life, but they've got to own what they did. The church has a watered down, cheap grace in so many circles, and this is what's led to this mess. Todd is being accused on multiple levels by multiple people that were with Todd's ministry for many years. Some were in senior leadership positions within his ministry. Mike Winger provided several different witnesses of high caliber, and he is being accused of not being held accountable to anyone. So Todd White was the king of his kingdom with almost no accountability. There was spiritual abuse, financial mismanagement, lying and embellishing in multiple situations. Todd was also involved with many others in the ministry swamp like Steve Coco. And on top of this, Todd White worked to keep all of this sin covered by using NDAs and legal threats.
In his analysis, He argued that true repentance requires more than vague regret. It requires naming the offense, acknowledging the harm, and demonstrating a commitment to change. According to Simone, what was offered instead resembled a public relations maneuver, something designed to calm critics without fully confronting the issues. Simone's reaction echoed a broader frustration. Across various platforms, believers who had once supported White began asking similar questions. If there were no serious issues, why had multiple former insiders come forward? Why had leadership teams dissolved? Why were former associates distancing themselves? Why did so many people who had worked closely with the ministry now speak of dysfunction? The comparison that surfaced most frequently was to Bethel Church's response to its own controversies. When Bethel faced public scrutiny over high-profile incidents, its leadership issued more detailed statements. While critics debated the sufficiency of those responses, many acknowledged that the statements were specific. They addressed particular actions, clarified positions, and outlined next steps. In contrast, White's apology seemed, to detractors, abstract. This difference fueled an uncomfortable conversation within charismatic Christianity about the theology of repentance itself. Critics argued that in some circles, repentance has been reduced to a brief acknowledgement followed by a rapid return to ministry. Say sorry, move forward, and keep building appeared to be the unspoken formula. But biblical repentance, they argued, involves confession, accountability, and fruit consistent with change. The conversation quickly expanded beyond one individual. Observers began questioning whether parts of the charismatic movement had developed a culture that unintentionally shields leaders from scrutiny. In environments where prophetic authority and spiritual gifting are emphasized, leaders may be viewed as uniquely anointed or divinely protected. That perception can make criticism feel like rebellion. It can also create blind spots. Multiple former insiders alleged that White operated with minimal accountability. They described a structure in which decisions flowed from the top down, with limited independent oversight. Some alleged that concerns raised internally were dismissed or minimized. Others claimed that fundraising campaigns lacked transparency about how funds were allocated. Financial allegations are particularly sensitive in ministry contexts. Donors often give sacrificially, trusting that their contributions will be used for specific purposes. When questions arise about spending, the damage can be profound. According to critics, White's ministry raised significant sums for a large campus project, including a $19 million goal. Promotional materials included testimonies, prophetic confirmations, and urgent appeals for partnership. One controversial element involved a prophecy from Sean Bowles, a once prominent prophetic voice who later faced his own public credibility crisis. At the time of the fundraising campaign, Bowles delivered what was presented as a prophetic confirmation that God had shown him the property would become a significant training center. That prophecy was reportedly incorporated into promotional content. Critics argue that prophetic narratives can powerfully influence giving. When donors believe they are participating in a divinely revealed vision, generosity increases. But if the prophetic source later faces discrediting allegations, questions inevitably arise about the legitimacy of the fundraising appeal itself. Was the prophecy independently verified? Were donors informed of subsequent controversies? Was the narrative adjusted or removed? Complicating matters further were allegations that White falsely claimed to spend regular Mondays receiving golf lessons with a supporter. The supporter later indicated that such meetings occurred only a handful of times. That discrepancy, though seemingly minor, became symbolic in the broader narrative. If a leader misrepresents something as mundane as a weekly appointment, critics asked, what else might be inaccurate? Meanwhile, Bible teacher Mike Winger escalated the conversation by publicly offering up to $100,000 to fund an independent investigation into White's ministry, if the ministry agreed to it. The offer was framed as a serious commitment to uncover truth through credible, third-party review. Supporters of the proposal argued that such an investigation could either vindicate White or confirm concerns. White's ministry did not immediately accept the offer. The longer the controversy persisted, the more it became about systemic issues rather than one apology. Observers noted that leadership without oversight creates vulnerability. Churches and ministries often lack the governance structures found in nonprofits or corporations. Boards may consist of close friends or spiritual allies rather than independent voices. Financial disclosures may not meet best practice standards. In such environments, even well-intentioned leaders can drift into unhealthy patterns. When a ministry grows rapidly, fueled by charisma, storytelling, and perceived supernatural validation, the infrastructure sometimes lags behind. Internal controls, external audits, and formal complaint mechanisms may not keep pace with expansion. The heart of the matter, critics say, is trust. Trust is built slowly and lost quickly. When a leader claims years of sinless living or asserts extraordinary spiritual experiences, expectations rise. If allegations later reveal inconsistencies, disillusionment can be sharp. For some former supporters, the disappointment is personal. They invested time, money, and faith into a vision they believed was divinely guided. Theologically, the debate returns to repentance. Genuine repentance, many argue, involves specific acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It means saying, I misled donors about this project, or I failed to provide proper oversight in this area. It may involve restitution. It often includes stepping back from leadership during investigation. Vague regret does not satisfy that standard. Financial transparency is equally critical. Ministries that handle millions in donations bear a responsibility to provide clear accounting. Independent audits, published financial statements, and transparent board governance are not signs of distrust. They are safeguards. In an era where skepticism toward religious institutions is high, transparency is not optional. The use of prophecy in fundraising introduces another layer of complexity. If prophetic words significantly influence financial decisions, then those prophecies must be subject to accountability. Otherwise, donors may unknowingly support projects based on narratives that later prove unreliable. Leadership culture also matters. When leaders are surrounded primarily by admirers, dissent can be perceived as disloyalty. Healthy organizations cultivate environments where concerns can be raised without fear of retaliation. Allegations that critics were silenced through legal threats or non-disclosure agreements only deepen suspicion, whether or not those claims are ultimately substantiated. As the controversy unfolded, observers noted a pattern familiar in other ministry scandals: initial denial or minimization, followed by partial acknowledgement, followed by gradual disclosure as new information emerges. History has shown that the longer specifics are withheld, the more credibility erodes. Yet, even amid criticism, some supporters urge caution. They argue that allegations do not equal guilt and that public trials on social media can distort facts. They emphasize the importance of due process and warn against rushing to judgment. That perspective underscores the complexity of navigating high-profile religious controversies in a digital age where information spreads instantly. Ultimately, the central question remains, what does accountability look like in modern ministry? For some, the answer involves independent investigation, public disclosure of findings, and structural reform. For others, it involves stepping aside permanently. For still others, it involves forgiveness after demonstrated change. But nearly all agree that generic apologies do not suffice when allegations are specific and serious. The Todd White controversy has become a case study in how quickly trust can fracture and how difficult it is to restore. It has sparked broader reflection within charismatic Christianity about theological assumptions, governance models, and the powerful influence of prophetic culture. It has also reminded donors and believers alike to ask hard questions, not from cynicism, but from stewardship. If there is a lesson emerging from the turmoil, it is that spiritual authority does not exempt leaders from scrutiny. In fact, it demands higher standards. Transparency is not a threat to ministry. It is its protection. Repentance is not weakness. It is strength. And accountability is not opposition. It is love expressed through truth. In the end, the storm surrounding Todd White may settle, but the conversations it ignited will likely continue. Churches and ministries across the country are watching closely, evaluating their own structures and practices. The integrity of leadership in the modern church depends not on charisma or platform size, but on humility, transparency, and the courage to confront hard truths. If you value deep investigative reporting on issues that shape faith and leadership today, consider subscribing for continued coverage.